Okay, we are live. So for those listening at home, welcome to the Dungeon Musings YouTube channel. My name is Kevin Madison, and I will be your friendly dungeon muser today. Today, we are going to be taking a look at a very old and very dear to me role-playing game, Champions, the hero system-driven superhero role-playing game. This is one of the earliest superhero role-playing games ever published, and it remains one of the role-playing games that is nearest and dearest to my heart. It's not something I get to the table very often, but it is something that I do greatly enjoy. Now, regular viewers of the channel may recognize that I've actually done a review of one version of Champions, the Champions Complete product, a couple of years back, but to be honest, the quality of that particular review is not something I'm super proud of. And a friend has recently pointed out that it does show up pretty highly on the search returns for Champions products. So I would, for one, I wanted to make a second stab at that review. And also, there's actually more to the actual Champions line of products as well that I thought maybe it would be worth touching on to show just the full slate of things that are available out there, because there's a lot of cool products that are available for Champions. But before we launch into the review itself, I will say that this review is dedicated to my buddy, George Flowers. So George, thanks again for your very kind donation to the Heroes Save Villages campaign. I hope you find this overview and review suitable, and I look forward to hearing anything that you might want to add that I may have either not shone enough of a light on, or I have not covered adequately. So anyway, without any further review delay, I should say, let's dive into the game or to the review itself. So what we're going to talk about is just as in most of my reviews or overviews, I'm going to do a background, a little bit of background on it, talk about what the game's about, the core mechanic, what do you play in the game, what do you do in the game, and then what's in the books. And I'll talk about, we'll go through all the different books that I've got available here. And then I'm going to close with talking about who this game might be for. At the time of recording, the #1 movie across the world is a movie about a superhero who lives underwater and talks to fish, which is bonkers. If you had told me as a kid that the Aquaman film may, generate $1 billion in ticket sales, there is absolutely no way that I would believe you. So we really do live in a kind of a nerd golden age where there is just an abundance of riches of cool superhero stuff available. One of the other major films at the time of recording that is leading the ticket sales is a movie with a bunch of different, niche multiverse versions of Spider-Man. And with that in mind, I guess similar to that, there's also at time of recording, there is an abundance of superhero role-playing games that are out there. And, when I was younger, I really, the type of game that I really enjoyed and was drawn to and tried to kind of collect all different kinds were superhero role-playing games, but at the time there was only things like, in the 80s, at least, Villains and Vigilantes, Marvel Superheroes, Champions, and Golden Age Heroes. But that was a British published game, and I didn't actually encounter that until I was an adult. But nowadays, there are so many superhero role-playing games, and really great ones as well, too. And in addition, there's a lot of multi-genre kind of games like GURPS or Savage Worlds that actually do pretty good jobs of simulating superhero stuff as well. So what I'm going to talk about today is kind of what specifically the kind of experience you get from Champions, where I think that the system excels, and where I think that you might experience some challenges, or at least there are certain expectations that you should have for your players. It is at the time of recording as well, too. This is the day for New Year's Eve, so I apologize for my kind of unkempt appearance. This is the tail end of Christmas vacation for me. So while I do hope that the otherwise quality of this video will be good, my presentation personally will not be there. I can see my hair in the video, and it's pretty wild. So as background, the specific edition we're talking about here is the 6th edition of the Hero System. The Hero System was originally created for the Champions role-playing game. The apocryphal story is that one of the lead designers, who I think was Steve Perrin, I may have that name wrong, but one of the lead designers actually created it during a lecture. He was bored during a college lecture and started kind of sketching out some ideas of how to create a superhero system. The hero system has largely remained the same. It expanded out from that into other genres, including like Western hero and fantasy hero, space hero, and it eventually kind of coalesced into a system first, a hero system first, and then genre supplements afterwards. The most recent edition, there's two different ways you can kind of get into Champions. You can get in that way that it's kind of become now, which is to say that you get into the two different books, the core rule books for the hero system. And these are my print-on-demand versions of the most recent version of it that I got through Drive-Thru RPG. You get those, and then you get the Champions genre source book, and then you've got what you need to play. Or alternatively, you can go through single product, which is Champions Complete. Now, I'm not going to be using PDFs for this review just because there's a lot of books that I'm going through and I don't want to be flipping through a ton of different PDFs, but everything that I'm going to be reviewing here or mentioning is something you can get in both print and PDF, and I've got links in the description of the video to take you through to either the your choice of Drive-Thru RPG or the Hero System, the Hero Games website, the publishers of Champions and the Hero System. I should say, though, that the Drive-Thru RPG stuff there's a couple of holes in their catalog. Like there are some products that just, for whatever reason, they're just not there, at least in the 6th edition. However, they do have an enormous catalog of older versions. So I mentioned this is the 6th edition of this. Drive-Thru RPG has stuff from pretty much every previous edition available, both in PDF and in a lot of cases in print on demand. So anyway, so the background, there is a great backstory to, as Champions went through the years. In particular, there is a source book that came out for it called Strike Force, written by a guy named Aaron Alston. Aaron is unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but Strike Force is one of those products that sort of is a bit of a legend in the gaming community. Aaron, while he was alive, ran a continuing campaign for, I believe it was 22 years. And what the Strike Force book was about is the experiences he had and the lessons he learned over the course of play. And Aaron took a pretty strong hand in the direction of Champions with some of the later editions. And one of the books I'm going to show you was actually written by him. But a lot of the advice that he provided in those in that original book, in the original Strike Force book, was later incorporated into the 3rd edition of Champions, which had this amazing George Perez cover to it, and it's one of the ways that these products, I think, distinguish themselves from other superhero role-playing games. Other superhero role-playing games, to be honest, I think just ape some of the advice that Aaron came up with in Strike Force and in the later editions of Champions. Things like, how to handle powers that might break rules, how to handle the downtime stuff, the concept of something called blue booking, where you do, exchange notes or emails or, correspondence with your players between sessions to fill out stuff that doesn't necessarily require all the other players. That's something that Aaron introduced and that was encouraged over the editions of Champions. So it's while we're going to be talking about the 6th edition, there's a really rich history to this setting, to this game, and the Strike Force book in particular is really something worth checking out, regardless of whether your brand of superhero role playing is Champions or something else. So let's talk about what it's about. So the version or the take on the hero system that I'm going to be talking about is playing superheroes. This can be street level superheroes like Daredevil or Luke Cage or whatever, or it can be up to really cosmic powered heroes. The game scales pretty well. You will be rolling a lot of D6s in it. So the only thing that the scaling of power really means is that your numbers are going to be a bit bigger. But in the day or the modern day of digital dice rollers, it's actually it's not a big pain to be rolling a bunch of dice and trying to total up the results. Or alternatively, if you really like rolling a bunch of dice, my players love getting a mitt full of dice and rolling them. So, this it does give you the opportunity to do that as well. There are a bunch of different optional rules to kind of tune the tone, I guess, of the experience at the table, in the sense of dialing up lethality of your games. If you really want to run more of a Punisher, type thing where characters feel their wounds and they are affected by them for a persisting period of time. Guns kill people, knives kill people, stuff like that. There are optional rules that you can adopt to sort of make sure your game models that. Or if you're playing more of a 4-color, like Justice League style game, there are ways to make it feel more like that as well. There are some inbuilt rules as well, like the rules for knockback that are pretty that really suit the setting and the source material. And there's a bunch of also, I guess I should say, good advice in these books dealing with how this differs from comic books. It's not a comic book. It's not a movie. It's a game. And this product, the Champions line, since Aaron Alston really became involved, has done a good job of really reinforcing that, which is not necessarily something I see in other games, or if I see them in other games, like I think DC Adventures has something like that, but I think it's pretty clear that they're standing on the shoulders of giants there and just stealing that idea to reemphasize here. So that's what you're playing. You're going to be playing superheroes of some kind of some scale, or at least superhumans. The core mechanic in this is actually pretty simple. You're rolling for task resolution 3d6, and you're going to be wanting to roll high, I think is what you need. Yeah, because I'm trying to remember here. OCV 11 or less. Yeah, no, low. You want to roll low on it. And it's either against a skill check, where it's a target number you're going to roll or less, an attribute check, which is, again, a number or less, or you're going to be rolling to attack. And combat in this does require a bit of calculation, but it's a little bit of math that you quickly learn to handle. There are 2 different types of combat, broadly speaking. There's like physical combat, and then there is mental combat. Physical combat uses 2 different values to model how good at defending yourself or how fighting offensively you are. Those are the offensive combat value and the defensive combat value. And while the more recent edition gives you a different way of calculating it, the way I've done for 30 years is you take 11. Is it 11? I think it's 11 plus OCV minus DCV. It could be 9. No, it's not. I think it's 11. So it's, let's say that you've got an OCV of 5 and you're trying to hit someone with a DCV of 7. 11 plus 5 is 16, minus 7 is 9. You need to roll a 9 or less to hit the target. There are factors that can affect that, including there are things called levels, which are kind of like flexible mechanical bonuses that you can apply to different things. So if you're really playing a character who's like a daredevil, who's a really trained martial artist, then they may be able to shift points back and forth between their OCV and their DCV, or just dumping those points into hitting harder and doing more damage on a round per round basis. So there's some really fun tactical options there. In addition, there is a slate of different maneuvers that most players can play out or can try. So, and that includes things like grappling or disarming or feinting, or doing one of my personal favorites, the haymaker, which is you take a whole bunch of time to swing and bam, hit somebody. The second kind of combat is mental combat value. So it's a offensive mental combat value, OMCV, and defensive mental combat value, DMCV. And that just deals with like psychic attacks or magical attacks on the mind or things like that. There are also, let's see here. So there's another effect, a type of thing, which is the, what is it? The presence attack, which is like intimidating things, like doing Batman, sweeping his wings out and stuff like that. But that is driven by the effect. So task resolution is always going to be 3d6, and the effect is always going to be a number of d6s. And there's a bit of a mathematical trick that you will use sometimes. There are certain circumstances where you will just be totaling the amount that you roll that's on the dice, and there'll be other times where you will be looking to count up what's called the body. So combat in Champions and in the hero system is divided into lethal and non-lethal areas. Your body stat models how much lethal damage you take before you die, and your stun is your non-lethal damage, and that's how much you take before you get knocked out. Any given attack will do both body and stun, and the way that you track the body is you look at the dice you rolled. If you rolled a 1, it's 0. If you rolled a 6, it's 2. If you rolled anything else, it's 1. And that's the way that the kind of like sleight of hand, I guess, trick or mathematical trick they use to model a lot of other things. So like if you want to know the duration of, say, like a flash effect, I created my flash of light power because I've got that kind of power. You would roll the dice, and then you might look at say you've got a 10d6 effect. You roll that, and you see how much body dice you rolled. The averages will probably be that you'll do 10 rounds, or 10. The effect will be 10, but that may that may change if you rolled really well or if you rolled really poorly. So the nice thing is you can get a small range of numbers with using the same dice, or you can get a really big range of numbers using the same dice. And that's really the core of the game. There is it's worth mentioning as well to the way the initiative system works, just because it is very different and it is a very wargamey kind of approach. So all characters have a stat called speed, and speed will tell you how many times in a given turn that you will be able to act. And every turn is divided into 12 different phases. And if your speed generally, your speed will more often than not never get higher than 12. But if it did, you just, you get to get multiple actions on different phases. But for most players that are ever, or most characters that are ever going to be in the game, their speed will be between 1 and 12, and that will tell you how many phases you get to act on in a given turn. And there's a chart that will tell you how many times that you get to act. Let me see if I can show you easily here what that chart looks like. And then what you do is, if you happen to have an action on the same turn as another character, then what you do is you just look and see who has the higher dexterity, which is another stat. So if your dexterity is higher, then you get to go before that other character. And every round just goes on or every turn, I can't find it easily right now, so I'll just take a look at it when I'm going through the books themselves. What you do is you just go through, and then your chart tells you how many times or which phases you act on, because they're basically spread equally across sort of the spectrum. So if you've got a speed of 6, you will be acting 6 times, and you'll probably be acting before someone who has a speed of 5 or a speed of 4 or a speed of 3. And it's a really it sounds very wargamey, I guess, to start with, but it really makes superheroes, in particular when your average superhero is built with the kind of starting points that you're going to have, probably will have like a 5 or a 6 speed versus the average human of like a 3. It means that, your heroes will feel like badass heroes because they'll be acting before the chumps, before the, Hydra minions, or before the minions acting for Ra's al Ghul or whatever. It's also, once the players get into the swing of things, it makes, and by that I mean the mechanics, it can make things really move swiftly at the table, because they know when it's their turn. They know when it's whatever phase, they know they get to take an action. And once you go through their phase one time, they will know if they act before the enemies or after the enemies or whatever, if they happen to share the same phase. That's really the only other kind of mechanical thing that maybe I should deal with. Or maybe one more thing I should maybe mention, because it does add a level of complexity to the game, and it is something that I think helps make this feel like a superhero, game with some real, grit to it, or mechanical heft. That is some of your expendable resources. So the resources that generally will go down over the course of play are your body, which I mentioned, which is, how long it takes before you die. If you lose body, it takes longer to recover than what your stun does. Your stun, it recovers actually pretty quickly, and there's a mechanic in the game for during your phase, if you're getting the crap kicked out of you, you can kind of, do that, wiping the blood from your nose, catching your breath kind of thing, and getting up and fighting again. And the third one is endurance. And endurance is what you use to fuel your powers. It's an optional, I mean, it's not an optional rule, but to be honest, I played for a lot of years where I ignored endurance altogether. So it's not necessarily something that is key to play. It is a balancing factor to prevent you from using, super powerful attacks over and over and over again, or super powerful powers over and over again. But I mean, it's if it's a level of bookkeeping that you're not interested in keeping, you don't necessarily need to have it in there. But the thing I really love about it is that it reflects a level, or it adds a level of verisimilitude, or immersion to the superhero genre that I don't see in other games. Which is to say, the time when, say, Iron Man has tapped his batteries, like, look, I just need a moment to recover. I've been blasting and blasting and blasting. Or it's Cyclops, blasting away with his eye beams and needing a moment to recover. Or Spider-Man, holding up some collapsed building and trying to let people out, and his arms trembling and whatnot because he's running out of juice. I love that stuff. Like, and it makes for some really fun moments at the table too, where characters are scrambling to catch their breath, because they've been going, full bore, or trying to push their powers or whatever to go beyond their limits. So that's a third resource. And all three of those do go up and down over the course of play. Endurance is recovered just like stun, which is to say another one of your stats, the recovery stat, will tell you how much you get to, if you stop and catch your breath, how much you'll get. And then everybody, at the end of every round, everyone gets what's called a post-segment 12 or phase 12 recovery. So at the end of the turn, everyone gets at least some health back. So you don't necessarily need to constantly being like, just give me a minute, with to get to keep things, at a good pace. So what do you? That's the core mechanic. I mentioned what do you play. So let's talk about how you go about building your characters. So the hero system is a point-driven system. You are given a pool of points, and then everything in the game has a different point value assigned to it. That's your statistics, as well as your skills, your talents, and your powers. There are also a wide variety of modifiers that you can add to your different powers and talents and whatnot, and your attributes, to be honest, as well, to really customize your character to play precisely the way you want. There's also a lot of great kind of like corollary abilities, I guess. So there's more. There's a great way that they have of balancing things like psychic abilities, or affliction abilities, or transformation abilities, or blinding or deafening or whatever abilities, or entangling abilities. All these things have gone through so many iterations that they play very easily at play. And once you know the mechanics, the kind of, that generally speaking, 5 points will get you 1d6 of decent power, or 15 points will get you 1d6 of a really important power. And by that I mean, 15d6 will give you a killing attack, something that does direct damage to the body, but and bypasses normal armor. Whereas 5 will give you a regular energy blast. So you could dump 60 points into a power and get an energy blast. The game is very mechanics driven, so you fill in the narrative. So you buy an energy blast or a range attack, and then you say whether it does fire or ice or force or crimson bands of Kaitorak or whatever the heck you want to call it. I guess that would be an entangle, not an attack. But I mean that's what you sort of fill in. There are also some great rules for creating what are called power frameworks, which are, if you've got a character like, say, Green Lantern, who has a great ring that is the single source of his power, but he can do a whole bunch of things with it, then you would build that as what's called a multi-power, which is kind of like, imagine a series of slots that have different powers in them, and you just move your, on a round per round basis, you move your little tick to be in different slots. So the points that drive that get dumped into a different slot, and then you give and go. What else do you want to know? Oh, the other thing is the game makes a differentiation between physical and energy attacks as well. So the defenses that you apply against those, and the defenses are separate from how hard you are to hit. So it's not like D&D where your defense adds to your difficulty to hit. That's things like your defensive combat value, your skills, your levels, your combat levels that you have to try and modify those. The defenses just are subtracted from the effect of whatever you're trying to do. And that's not just physical and energy defense. There's also mental defense, like how resilient your character is to psychic attack. There's power defense, where if you want to make yourself so you can't, have your powers leached as easily. If there's like a parasite type character who is going to steal your powers, that can defend against that. There's flash defense, which is, prevents yourself from being blinded or deafened or whatever. If it sounds like there's a lot going on in the game, there is, but the level of complexity of learning the system is really the biggest hurdle. Once you know the basics of that stuff, the play at the table is extremely fast and very intuitive. You'll get a sense of feel, even if you decide to adopt some optional rules where you want to allow characters to improv abilities and stuff like that with their powers. Like you can in a lot of other superhero role-playing games, you'll get a real easy sense of, okay, well, you want to do this. I think it's going to be X amount of points in, or X amount of dice with an entangle or with a whatever. I want to use my super strength and wrap this guy up in the torn remains of a car. Well, that's probably an entangle, and I'll probably just use whatever your strength rating is in points, and you'll spend a whatever point, either some endurance, or you'll spend one of your hero points, which is an optional rule for the most recent edition of this. And the other, I guess, the upside to that level of complexity is you really can build pretty much any character you can conceive of. If you want to play a character who is either something of your own creation, or something that is based, heavily on an existing property, you want to play Arachnid Man, or you want to play, Captain Patriot or whatever. It's very easy to build those things. But you can also do cool things like mash up characters too. If you want to play, I don't know, Captain America and Ghost Rider mashup, who is the avenging patriotic spirit of America, go nuts. You just got to figure out how to spend those points. There's some guidance on how many points you'll spend, and the way that the game in previous editions was balanced was by the level of basically the amount of points you could put into any given ability. That would be your starting point, and then as you gain levels, and not levels, as you gained experience, you would be able to spend more points to change those abilities. But the starting point would allow everyone to sort of to be functioning within a relatively balanced limit, and also would give some direction for players who are new to say, I want my character to be really good at punching, or I want to be really good at mind control. Well, then those limits will give you an idea of like, well, then this is what your power should be at. There's also some really great advice in all of these books we're going to go through about making sure your character can participate in all the different elements of the game. Again, it's a game, not a comic book or a movie. So little things like, how are you going to move around the battlefield? You're going to get into superhero slugfest. So how are you going to move? Consider that for your character. Do they, lift themselves up with telekinetic power? Do they swing around on a web line or like a grappling hook? Do they fly? Do they run super fast? Do they leap? And there's lots of great advice for making sure that you're making good use of those powers. I'm also going to go through some of the examples some of the examples they have in the book where they give sample characters for things you can build from. And there's a really cool product out that gives you sample powers to draw from as well too. Now, if this to you sounds like, boy, this just sounds like an awful lot of math to, before I can ever play this game. Well, if you're making your own character, you're not wrong there. However, the Hero system or the Hero Games does publish a program called, I think it's called Hero Builder. And it basically allows you to, it's a computer program that will do all the calculations for you. And it has all the different powers and modifiers and stuff like that. So it's very easy to put a character together. And there's also, there are pre-generated characters available in many of the books. Either those are heroes who are offered as examples for you to play, or they are villains that just happen to be built at a starting character's level. So if you do have a character in mind, or a character type in mind, and you don't want to go through the hassle of generating all those stats, it's pretty easy to find something out of one of the books to just use as your model. I want to play an archer with a bunch of trick arrows, no problem. I want to play a kung fu expert, no problem. I want to play a brick, a super tough guy, beats up people and throws things around, no problem. There's examples of those in the rule book, and then you could still indulge or engage, I guess, with the system a little bit and make some customization. But anyway, so that's the game. That's what the mechanic is. It definitely is a legacy of older games in the sense that it's got a great deal of detail in it. But again, like the front end work is really where all that work happens. It's the work of creating that character. Once that character's together, the level of complexity is a lot less. It's just that task resolution and then effect dice that I mentioned. And you get to make some fun and interesting decisions at the table as well as you're picking different tactics to apply. There is also a system as well too that, oh gosh, I really should look this up. I think it's called Complications in the most recent edition, but it used to be called Advantages or Disadvantages, I think. But complications basically are the things that make your life as a hero complicated. It's your weakness to a certain radioactive element. It's the boyfriend or girlfriend that constantly gets into trouble. It's the unrelenting enemy who's hunting you down. They're the things that make the game more interesting for you. And in the most recent version of it too, they've changed the way that some of those elements will be, how they come into play. So, for instance, your hunters now, it'll set if you've got, say, a villain that hunts you or an organization that hunts you. I'm playing a mutant character, and the super mutant hunting robot is after me. If you pick that as your complication, then every couple of sessions, that character will be making an appearance, and that's a decision that the players get to make in terms of how the campaign plays out, and I like that an awful lot because it's one of the ways where the players get to have a lot of an kind of authorial hand in making what the campaign is going to be about. They're saying specifically, look, this is a thing that I think is cool and I want to see it happen in our campaign. Obviously it's got to work with your DM, but I think most DMs would be more than happy to have players hand them things saying, look, I love this character. I want to see this character in my game. Now, Champions is, I should be clear as well too, is not a licensed product. Like I've mentioned a whole bunch of characters that are the copyright characters of major publishing companies or studios, but there are plenty of online resources to find where there are examples of those characters. And Champions, to be honest, is really, the game has always really been about you creating your hero. Your hero may be a thinly veiled version of some other character, but, you make your character and make it special. That's your opportunity to see that particular hero be something, make them something special and memorable, and not just you playing Batman or you playing Superman or you playing Spider-Man or whatever. You can adopt, you can quite easily just take one of those characters and plunk them in if you really want to. And you can also just run Champions in one of those existing worlds. There will be some work on the part of the DM to come up with the stats for some of the things that you'll be fighting. But as we go through this, I'll show you, it's pretty easy to do that because the default champion setting is sort of a pastiche setting that has a lot of elements from classic Marvel and DC comics, and to a lesser degree, some of the Image stuff from the 90s. So let's talk a little bit about the actual products themselves. So I mentioned that there's two different ways to get into Champions, and I'll start with the least complicated version, and then I'll make my way through to the most complicated version. So the simplest way is this sucker here. This is Champions Complete. It's a product that came out a couple years ago that is the first time they've done an all-in-one Champions product since, I believe, the 3rd edition, which is pretty awesome. It features a somewhat streamlined version of the hero system, those 2 big blue books I held up earlier, but it really has everything. Like the amount of things that are missing from this are not noticeable at all. It's really rare power usages or things like that just you wouldn't. It's not like, oh well, where's the X power? Where's my X-ray vision? Where's my whatever, like the time travel power? That's all in here in a nice concise book. It's all black and white, and one of the things that is a bit unfortunate with Champions is because it is not a licensed product, it uses non-comic artists basically to do a lot of the art in it, or at least non-professional comic artists. So the art in the book, to be honest, is not as polished as what you would see in, say, like a Marvel product or one of the the Mutants and Masterminds DC Adventures products, but it's not horrible. It is black and white. Some of them are a little sketchy, but some of the illustrations are really memorable and certainly help you get in the spirit of the setting. So there you go. There's a bank robbery being foiled. This book has everything you would need to create, play, and run superheroes for as long as you could conceivably have players interested in playing. There are some good examples in here, both of heroes. So you got an armored hero named like Iron Man-ish, named Defender. You got a brick named Ironclad, kind of like the Hulk. There's Sapphire, who's a blaster, and so forth. So there's a bunch of different examples, some sample villains as well. And all those people are built with the same amount of points that you would start a campaign with. So you could easily snag any of these characters and just use them as your, as your PCs. If players don't want to be overwhelmed or don't want to go through the hassle of creating their own characters for it. There are also some great examples at the end to show you how to build certain things. So things like, the Cord of Honesty, the Power Ring, the Questionite Shield, which you can bounce around but also protect yourself with, repulsor rays, and so forth. I think web's in here as well. The madder I get, the stronger I get. So these are just helpful ways to show you how you can model those things in the system. How you would go about shuffling those points around. Now, you may ask, well, why the heck would you want to go through the hassle of spending all those points, and why is it important to be able to do all that stuff? If you're looking for a system that is less involved and that requires less of that kind of finicky twisting of dials and so forth to come up with a specific implementation of your power, this may not be the system for you. There are definitely some other systems out there that are middle grounds, like DC Adventures or Mutants and Masterminds 3rd edition, that are very close to that, but there is something to be gained in that level of granularity. And there's something cool to be able to have the players pick precisely how their powers manifest in the game. It's a level of customization that definitely appeals to certain players, to be able to say, here's how I want the rules to work for my fireball. I want to have to be stationary. I want to have to say some words out loud, and I want to have to spend the whole round, charging this thing up. But because of those limitations, I'm going to have it have more effects as well, too. It's also going to hit a massive area. It's also going to persist. It'll burn, afterwards. And that's the kind of, thing that you can do in the game, is you can make it work precisely how you want it to work. If you are not, or you want some help coming up with those ideas, there is also a product that's come out for it called Champions Powers. And basically what this is a massive book of examples of how to build different powers, also to get ideas for the way your theme of your powers works, what things could spring from that, in kind of Grant Morrison-esque postmodern area of comics. Characters are expected to do an awful lot more with their powers than what they could before. A Silver Age character who can cover themselves in ice and create ice constructs, that's the extent of their ice powers. And then you get into some postmodern stuff where they can turn themselves into snowflakes and drift around, or they can transform their entire body into ice and whatnot. And that's the kind of the sort of postmodern wild implementation of superpowers. That's what this can give you, some ideas for, you know, what your character with, say, density alteration powers might be able to do. You know, like, what do we got here? Crushing things, disrupting electronics, augmenting your strength, carrying more stuff, intangible touch. What else here? Thief's touch. You can render your arm or hand intangible and reach through and grab stuff. You know, one other power construct I didn't mention as well. I mentioned multi-power, but there's another one called variable power pools. And basically what it is you set certain parameters for it, but it's just amount of points that you can change whenever the power pool tells you can change it. So that could be like spells that you could memorize each day, or it could be a gadget pool if your character is like a Reed Richards style inventor, or what's his name? The Reaver from the X-Men comics, Scalp Hunter. Scalp Hunter could slap together weapons all the time. That would be a variable power pool as well. Just a series of points you can improv. But anyway, this gives you a massive list of things to choose from. I've used this quite a bit to just kind of not only to get an idea of like, oh, here's how I would build or I could build like a lightning blast or an area mental attack. But also to come up with other ideas for what this could be, what kind of things I could build with that type of with that type of power source. Because again, it's an effects-driven game. Like you determine how it plays out at the table in terms of like special effects, and that informs what other things you can do with it. A character who's got flame manipulation will have probably an energy blast attack, and a guy who can create ice will probably have an energy attack as well. But the power source for that would tell you probably that, well, I could create ice and entangle and grapple someone, but I couldn't do that with fire because it's intangible. Although I could create an area effect with fire that could burn a bunch of people and leave things burning, whereas you couldn't set things on fire with, your ice power. So in that way, the fiction sort of constantly interacts with the rules to help you figure out what is permitted and what is not permitted. Both of these products are available both in PDF and print on demand through DriveThru RPG. This is the print on demand version I got from DriveThru RPG, and as I kind of alluded here, I've really loved that. So those are the kind of the cheap way to get into Champions to give it a sense. And the Champions Powers book is absolutely not necessary. You have everything you need to play Champions with just this. What Powers does is just give you more options and another resource to draw on for inspiration for creating your own characters, be they heroes or villains or whatever. The other way to get into Champions, or a way to supplement your existing Champions play if you like it, is to go in through the more indirect route, which is through the hero system. So hero system currently in 6th edition is published in 2 different books. This one is all dealing with character creation, and as you can see, there is just a shit ton of rules that are in there. And this is all about actual play. This is the rules for play at the table. Now, while this may seem like an extremely daunting and very dry book to get through, or series of books to get through, it's really more of a reference than it is a book you can sit down and read. And the glossary in both of these, or the index, I should say, in both of these, is phenomenal. Like the best I've ever seen in a role-playing game. You can find everything you need very, very quickly. Both of mine, my copies here, are ones that I got through DriveThru RPG, which means I got a PDF copy with it as well. The PDF copies are even easier to find rules. Now, more often than not, you're not going to really need to find those things on the fly. But if basically any option that you could conceivably think of, be it something that's going to happen in play or something that is, different ways of modifying the rules to make things more lethal, more epic in scale or whatnot, you can find it in one of these 2 books. Now, these give you the core rules, but then what you would want to pick up is this sucker here. And I mentioned at the outset Aaron Alston's name. Aaron Alston's one of the co-authors of this, along with the line producer for the Hero Games things, or the Hero Games for the last couple of years, Steve Long. This is a beautiful full-color book all about playing superheroes, you know, and this doesn't give you a setting. It's just a resource about running a superhero role-playing game, from advice on creating characters to, you know, how to depict villainy correctly, you know, what motivates, suggestions on setting up your villains and how they interact with the players and why the players get involved with them, structuring mysteries, adding elements like hidden lands or other superhero things in the context of your superhero role-playing game, you know, because again, superhero role-playing game is not a comic. It's not a movie. It's a role-playing game. So this provides some really terrific advice on how to actually play that, you know, how to make that work at the table. Here's another example, or some examples of the color art that's in here. And this stuff is awesome. It is definitely a much more lavish product than the Champions Complete, and it is priced accordingly, but it's got fantastic stuff. There's a bunch of advice on how to build different types of characters, like detectives or gadgeteers or patriots or, you know, bricks, the real tough guys, and weapon masters and so forth. There are also samples of, or not samples, but flow charts basically for how to build. Like if you don't want to waste a bunch of time putting together your brick character, cool. Start here, and then you start which gives you the starting point with some of your points spent, and then you go through and pick what type of what type of characters you want to be playing specifically. Do you want to play a basic brick, a brawler, a brute, a nimble brick, and then what secondary powers do you want to have? Are you fast healing? Are you super dense? Do you have eye beams? Can you fly? Can you leap really far? You know, and then you pick skills and so forth. And what this does for each of the different kind of major archetypes, you know, the aquatic character, speaking of our box office breaking underwater superhero, the aquatic character, the blaster, brick, earth and stone, there's massive amounts of options for every single one of these character types as well, which gives you tons of fodder for you creating your character. It makes it very easy to just mix and match and create the type of character that you want. But again, because it's a point generation system, you can completely break the mold and mix and match between several of these. If you want to play a character who's sort of a part brick, but also part fire wielding, you know, character, like a magma type character, go nuts. You're limited by the amount of points you have to spend. So, you know, you may not be quite as good as a dedicated character with just one role. But this gives you tons of things to look at and consider. And then it also gives you examples of other things like superhero bases, superhero vehicles, and then some villains in here as well, too, to show you how those might be built, including one of my absolute and all-time favorites, Pulsar. So Pulsar, this is really just an aside here. This is something that tells you about the history of this particular game. So Pulsar is kind of a low-level blaster character. He flies around. He's got some, you know, blasting powers, but he's kind of a chump. Like he's really built to be a character that your player characters, your player heroes can just beat the shit out of. But the funny thing that was, you know, introduced about him originally is that he always wanted to impress the 80s actress Morgan Fairchild. So it became this running joke throughout. It's referenced in the most recent version of this, but not as quite as heavily. Partly because I think Morgan Fairchild's in her 60s or 70s at this point. But anyway, there's a bunch of characters that if you are a longtime fan of the Champions line, these are characters who have been around since the beginning, since like the, you know, early 80s. But they have been updated to try and fit in the modern kind of comic sensibility in the same way that like modern comics take modern spins on old characters, right? Jeff Johns does a terrific job of that, of taking dusty old characters and making them really cool, particularly in the Justice Society comics. But anyway, so that's what's in here. This is just a terrific all-in-one resource for how to run, how to play, how to structure, you know, in a meta context, how to set up and successfully run a superhero role-playing game. And this is something that you could just use this directly with Champions Complete or with the hero system. It is one of my favorite role-playing products I've ever purchased. It's got an enormous amount of value in it, and yeah, and it incorporates a lot of, if not all of, the advice that I mentioned from that Strike Force product. So there's terrific ideas in terms of how to get your players thinking in terms of a superhero role-playing game, and gives you great ideas for how to long-term plan for that, so it plays out like an ongoing comic book series. Not just a one-shot, not just a a movie. Although you're certainly free to do that. So that's the stuff that is sort of a starting point. That stuff is mostly setting neutral. You can choose to run this in the DC universe, in the DC animated universe, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, whatever you want. But you would have to do the work there. But if you want a world to play in, they've also published this. So Champions Universe is the current sort of go-to resource for the default Champions world. And the advantage there, I think, I'm not going to go into it too much, but the advantage to adopting that setting as your go-to setting is that things are, they're going to know sort of, the players would know sort of what things are. There's a Dr. Doom type character there. There's a, mutant hunter kind of sentinel type things there. There's a Lex Luthor type. But your characters are free to stamp their importance on themselves. If you're playing in a DC campaign and you are fighting, you're playing original characters and you're fighting, say, Lex Luthor, you are always going to be thinking in the back of your mind that Superman's going to come in. Same thing with the Joker, same thing with whatever, with any other kind of lesser character. And I think that, there's a degree to which that will impose on the game. And it's not to say that necessarily Batman or Superman will come in and save your bacon, but that they belong in someone else's rogues gallery. The advantage of running a setting like this that has sort of recognizable archetypes or pastiche versions of the characters, but does not have that specific name associated with it, is that you're able to make them your player characters' villains. The Dr. Doom in this is a guy named Dr. Destroyer, who is awesome. And you can make Dr. Destroyer your player character's nemesis, or this character called Menton, who's kind of like an evil version, kind of like if Magneto and Professor X were swapped. This is a character who is a villainous mutant psychic, but he's phenomenally powerful and wants to take over the world. Well, that's an awesome villain. And if your characters are the ones who are facing him, well, he becomes their villain rather than, it just being someone else's villain who happens to be causing them problems. So that's the advantage. I think that's the pitch for using that kind of setting. And to that end, oh boy, they have published not one, not two, but 3 books that are kind of like the last word on their villains books. Throughout the history of the game, Champions has always published a series of books called Villains, which, Champions and Villains. And the Villains is kind of like the adversary book for it. In the 3rd edition of the game, they started doing kind of specialized versions. So you'd see like classic enemies or European enemies or, enemies of the, or not enemies, villains. What do you call it? Classic villains. Or is it enemies? Yeah, it's enemies. Was the old books. But anyway, the most recent edition is these 3 bad boys here. So these are the 3 villains books. And each of these is divided into different categories. So you got master villains. These are guys who want to take over, guys and girls who want to take over the world. Who have legions of followers, and these are your Dr. Dooms, your Lex Luthors, your the Master. You've got villain teams, which is your Brotherhood of Evil or your Injustice Society or things like that, and then you've got your solo villains. And each of these, I'll just go through one of these guys. Actually, I'll go through the Master Villain one because that's got Dr. Destroyer in it. So each of these has a huge amount of characters. They vary between like 300 and or 288 and about 300 pages or so. Like they're pretty big books. They're full color, and they've got a ton of great information in them. Full stats for all the characters, which you can use as inspiration for creating your own characters, either player characters or villains, as well as terrific ideas for how to incorporate this into your campaign. Every single character, every single villain in here has a whole section on what powers, like what their powers and tactics are, what their personality is, what their resources are, and then campaign use. How would you use this character in your campaign? Who are their allies and adversaries? And then there's always a little call out text here that gives you fast facts about it. So rather than trying to, fumble through a description of these characters, you can have them roll their knowledge skill and learn what they, see what they know about these characters. Like Necrol is this awful, undead looking guy who I like because he's a Canadian villain, which is pretty cool. And let's say the characters make their knowledge roll. They learn that in 2007, well, first off, they'll learn that Necrol is a powerful villain, typically based in Canada, who's possibly undead and has the ability to absorb powers from other superhumans by harvesting their flesh and organs. So he is a superhero ghoul vampire kind of thing. To make the knowledge roll, they'll learn that in 2007, Necrol killed all members of the Canadian super team Vanguard and absorbed their powers, making him stronger than ever. The Canadian government has imposed a moratorium on efforts to attack him directly until it can assemble a team custom designed to take Necrol down as safely as possible. I've actually used Necrol in a one-shot that I ran not recently, but a couple of years ago now. But that's just one example of one character, and how many ideas you can get. You could run a whole campaign focused just around this one villain. And there's great suggestions on, how to modify the character to make him more powerful for more powerful villains, less powerful for more street level heroes. And there's just a ton of them. Like there's a whole host of villains in each of these. And I will quickly show you Dr. Destroyer because I do love him. Where is he? Where are you, buddy? These characters too, they sort of run the gamut of really epic, villainous characters to kind of, there are a couple, Silver Age carryovers that are kind of silly or lighthearted characters. So there is Dr. Destroyer. And and he's probably the most recognizable villain for Champions, apart from another character called Mechanon, who's kind of like Ultron, to be honest. But that's what it gives you, is what these books give you is an enormous amount of resources to keep your campaign going for, to be honest, forever. Like I will never get through the amount of resources. If I chose to keep running Champions as my go-to game from now till eternity, there's more material in here than I would ever be able to get through in a reasonable campaign. In addition, if you are looking to play in a specific genre of superhero role-playing, be it like dark heroes like or like say mystic heroes like Ghost Rider, or you want to play street level heroes like Daredevil or Punisher, or you want to play galactic heroes like the Legion of Superheroes or the Guardians of the Galaxy. There's different source books for all those things. But I will talk about one that recently came out very briefly, which is the Golden Age Champions. And this is the most recent edition. There was an older edition for this I actually don't know about 4th and 5th edition, but there's a 3rd edition version of this that was really, really fun. And this is playing superheroes in the Golden Age of comics. And there's, as with all their supplements, there's a ton of great material in there, great sample characters, sample histories you can go from, and there's some great advice on running things in that time period, like how that would differ from modern role-playing. And again, that's just one of the source books that you could get for it. So if you have a specific niche you want to play in, I want to play super spy characters or, 80s or 90s hyper-violent, vigilantes, you can probably find stuff for that. But that's really not necessary. Like, this is a nice addition to have, as are the villains books. But if you already have in your mind what you want to do with your game and what you want to play in a superhero role-playing game, you can do all of that with just the Champions Complete book. Everything else that I've shown you here is all just cake and gravy. Some of it's got, I mean, it's great gravy and it's great cake, but it is absolutely not necessary. Everything you would need to play is just in that core rulebook. You'll just need to do more of the work for it. So anyway, that is the Champions line, or at least that's the stuff I've got available to show you. So who would this be for? Let's maybe talk about who it's not for. If you're looking for a very rules light, breezy kind of game where it's going to be a lot of improvisation, or it's very narrative driven, this is not the game for you. It's just, there are other games like the Margaret Weiss published Marvel game is great for that. Masks, the Powered by the Apocalypse game, is great for that. But if you're looking for something where you've got mechanics you can, stand on and jump on, things that are sturdy, it's clear what can and cannot be done. If you're more of a like Pathfinder or to a degree a D&D 5th, if you're more of a mechanical minded player or DM, this is probably going to have some interest for you. Now, the thing that is probably the most off-putting is the amount of math that you potentially can be doing in that. But there are great resources to help with that. Setting aside the option of just using pre-generated characters, there are great Excel spreadsheets you can find to help with the math on that stuff. And again, that really only happens, like that's the only time you're really going to be doing that work is when you're making your character. And to be honest, it's a lot of fun to do that. That's one of the fun parts. If you are the type of character or player who likes suffering over making a feat selection, or wants to have a specific control, likes customizing their spells with different feats, or picking different spell lists and whatnot, this is a game that might really appeal to you. In particular, it's a superhero game. And also, I guess I would say as well that this is a game that plays extremely well at the table. Once you've put that work in, once you've got it there, it's a really fun and exciting superhero game. Like, you really genuinely feel like superheroes, but closer to the feel of the tangible feel, I guess, of the cinematic universes than I would like a comic book. And by that, I mean, like, because you are tracking things on a round per round basis, because you are, guns can potentially hurt you. If you're not a bulletproof character, getting hit by a bullet is going to suck really bad. I mean, there are ways to prevent yourself from getting hit. If you're like a Batman type character, with having lots of levels in DCV will make it very unlikely that you'll get hit. And thanks to the, what do you call it? The, what's the word? Probability curve, I guess I'm thinking of, with the 3d6 dice pool. You're not going to, it's not like a D20 where, a 1 is as likely to come up as a 20, where you got a decent chance of getting tagged. It's much less likely that a super powerful character will get hit. But if someone gets a drop on you, someone gets shot, or, gets a burst off and you get tagged, it's going to reflect that. And I like that. Like, I mean, to me, that feels more immersive and more visceral. The world feels more tangible and more like the living world than, a more narrative-based game, which is really just more focused on kind of story and whatever. How heavy a car is not really important in a game like Masks or the Marvel game. There's not a chart you look at to determine that. It's whatever's appropriate for the story. But in this, it feels more like, like that kind of detail does matter. So if that's something that interests you, the dramatic moment of Spider-Man, it was recreated in the most recent Spider-Man live action film. But the moment of Spider-Man being trapped under all that rubble, and water slowly filling up. It's an old Steve Ditko comic, and he had to push himself up, and really sturdy, draw on the last vestiges of his strength and find his way to get out of there. That's the kind of, pushing against your limits stuff that this game allows you to do, because you do have clear limits, and it's not just narrative flourish. It's the kind of emergent limits pushing stuff that comes from these older style of games. And I guess if you want a great deal of control and detail in your powers, you really cannot do better than this. In comparison to other point generation systems as well, I mentioned at the outset that GURPS does a decent job with supers. This does a much better job of reflecting overall superhero stuff, because the system was designed from the get-go to do that. It was designed to reflect superhero combat, because really combat's the most important stuff to be able to have clear and articulate rules for. GURPS is designed to simulate reality, and that hits up hard against the game in a lot of cases, against the superhero genre. So that's where I would think that this would be a preferable game to GURPS in terms of like character or point generation. The one downside as well too is if you really like having narrative control over your characters, if you like spending hero points or action points or whatever you want to call them to alter the game, those are not part of the default system here. So there are optional rules for incorporating that, but they're, to be honest, really a bit of a half-assed measure. It's things like, you get a D6 worth of points that you can use to modify your dice rolls. But it's really easy to implement that stuff if you want, because the game is very intuitive. As I mentioned, a basic ability is going to get 5 points to get you 1d6. 15 points will get you 1d6 in a more impressive ability. Knowing that those are sort of the scales, it's easy to eyeball when a character wants to try and do something with their power that they've never done before, without having to go and break out a calculator and calculate what they've got. You can look at the character sheet, see how many points they've got in their existing ability, and then say, okay, well, here's what I'm going to let you do. And it'll either cost you endurance or it'll, whatever. And having endurance as a resource is a great way of tracking that stuff. If your character really wants to try and do something that's beyond their ability, you can moderate that or control the amount of times they go outside of their character sheet by making a high endurance cost. And then what you can do is when they get character points, they can buy that as a new ability, as a regular persisting ability, and you've got an in-story version for why you get to keep using that. So, but anyway, so that's that. If you want to see some actual play of it too, maybe I neglected to put it in when I recorded this, but I will add some links in the thing or in the description to other sessions, a couple sessions I've run of this. If you want to see it at play, I by no means a seasoned Champions DM, so any errors I may make or any fuck ups in terms of the flow of combat, please forgive that. But it'll give you a sense of sort of what you can see, and it's really exciting. Having a resource like Roll20 makes it a lot easier to run these kind of dice intensive games, but anyway, that's that. So again, I don't think this game is necessarily for everybody, but if it's for you, you're going to love it. It's going to be one of those games that may get under your skin, and you will find yourself thinking in terms of Champions years and years and years down the road, as I do. I routinely in the course of my life have had things come up where, for whatever reason, it brings me back to Champions. And one of the more recent ones was playing the video game Overwatch, which has all these different characters with all these different kind of powers and whatnot. It's a first-person shooter, but they got different powers and whatnot. And I immediately started thinking of, how would I build his ability in Champions? And that kind of, if you're inclined towards that kind of theory crafting, this game has, an endless amount of cool stuff for you to dive into. There's a reason that this game has largely remained the same for such a long time. It is not an all-purpose tool, but for the specific type of player and campaign, it is better than any other. I think I can't think of another game that does a crunch-heavy superhero game better than Champions. So anyway, that is my last review or overview for 2018. I did it. So if you have any comments, questions, or concerns regarding this, or if you've got some other comments on Champions, I know there's quite a few folks out there who are very seasoned Champions players and DMs. So if you want to share some insight as well, then please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below, or you can reach me on Twitter at Dungeon Musings. or you can shoot me an email at dungeonmusings@gmail.com. If you enjoy this, you can also find me on my podcast on Dungeon Musings, which you can find on all of your favorite podcast platforms, including Stitcher and Apple Podcasts and Anchor. Otherwise, I hope you've enjoyed this overview. I hope you found it helpful. If you do have any other questions as well, too, if there's something that might help you make the decision as to whether this is the right game for you or not, again, please don't hesitate to contact me in one of those different available venues. Otherwise, I hope you all have a very, very happy New Year. I hope 2019 treats you all well, and I will look forward to seeing you in the near future. Thanks for watching. A happy gaming, everyone.